and thrust the United States into the conflict. In the Pacific, the combat made headlines. Lieutenant James Doolittle's bombing raids on Tokyo, the intense naval battles at Coral Sea and Midway Islands, and the battles of Guadalcanal. Slowly, surely, Allied forces were turning the equation against the Japanese troops. American soldiers were ferried across the Atlantic on passenger liners converted to troop ships to combat the Axis powers. Here the land battles were drawn out, grim. In Russia, thousands died during the prolonged Battle of Stalingrad before the Soviets finally managed to surround the German Sixth Army and force a surrender. Hitler's Blitz devastated London. Then the Allied forces retaliated, their bombs wreaking catastrophic destruction across Germany. For a week, Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill met at Casablanca to discuss plans for the Allied land invasion of Europe, a move that would begin the following year at Normandy on June 6th that was to be known as D-Day. Life on the American home front was a mixture of war frenzy and fervent optimism, coupled with an ominous foreboding of the unknown. Few failed to believe in an eventual Allied victory, but the deaths of husbands, brothers, sons, and fiancés brought the horrors of war into the living rooms of America. Daily life was completely subjugated to the war effort. As rationing took hold, hundreds gardened for victory, and housewives incorporated meatless Tuesdays and Fridays into their weekly menus. Sugar, shoes, coffee, and cheese were precious commodities. When not engaged in creative household planning, women manned the welding stations and operated heavy machinery at the industries that provided the ammunition, planes, and ships needed to win the war. At the same time, there was a giddy recklessness, a frivolity hastened by the terrible uncertainties of the conflict in Europe and the Pacific. Late into the night, young lovers jitterbugged and lindy-hopped to the music of Glenn Miller and the Andrews Sisters. A certain sentimentality crept into popular culture, where The White Cliffs of Dover and I'll Be Seeing You perfectly captured the unsettled mood of life on the edge of the abyss. It was also a time of romance. Young women, unsure whether they would see their suitors again once they went off to fight, eagerly embraced whatever fleeting moments of happiness they might find as war brides. Paul James Tate was eager for life. A 21-year-old native of Houston, Texas, he had watched the ominous rumblings from Europe with growing interest. Most healthy young men found it difficult to resist the excitement of war, and Tate, filled with patriotism, had joined the ranks of the United States Army. A dark-haired, handsome man whose short stature masked a surprising presence, he was intrigued with the burgeoning field of military intelligence. Through sheer determination and long hours of work, he would eventually rise through the ranks to that of colonel. Tate had a knack of impressing those he met with his honor, dedication, and loyalty, although he remained something of an enigma, silent and reserved, traits which worked well in his assigned career of military intelligence. But he was also a man with a sense of purpose, whose determination in pursuit of his goals proved attractive to the impressionable young women he encountered. Undoubtedly, some of this had worked well in his quest of Doris Gwendolen Willett, a pretty 20-year-old who was, like himself, a native of Houston. Although as she grew older, Doris had a tendency to stoutness, as a young woman, a friend recalls, she was really beautiful, very, very attractive. From a solidly middle-class background, Doris was raised as a Southern belle, gracious and charming. Her genteel manner and soft, melodic voice were powerful tools when she chose to focus them, and her attentions were always genuine. Paul and Doris had married on the 25th of January, 1942. If the complexities of the war shadowed their happiness together, such thoughts had been dispelled that summer when Doris learned that she was pregnant. It was not the most opportune time for a baby. The Tates were unsettled, with Paul's military career at its beginning stages, and the outcome of the war still uncertain. There was no promise that the situations in Europe or the Pacific might not worsen and lead to a new military assignment, leaving Doris alone to care for the baby. And yet, this very uncertainty also meant that the time Paul and Doris had together was precious. With no guarantee for their future, the Tates happily anticipated